When Daniel's German shepherd bounded out of the forest, he expected a rabbit, maybe a stick. Instead, clamped gently in the dog's jaws was something unthinkable, a tiny lion cub. Minutes later, another appeared. What followed was a chain of events so heartbreaking, it would leave an entire village in tears. The morning began like any other for Daniel. The sun was just beginning to climb, painting the sky in warm streaks of orange and gold. With Rex, his loyal German shepherd, trotting happily at his side, Daniel set out for a walk along the forest's edge. It was a routine they shared daily, peaceful, predictable, grounding. Birds sang overhead, and the air carried the earthy scent of dew on grass. Nothing about this morning hinted at the extraordinary moment about to unfold. As they reached the dirt path near the clearing, Rex suddenly bolted ahead. His ears pricked, his nose to the ground. He disappeared into the thick brush with a determination Daniel had seen before, usually when rabbits or squirrels darted past. "Rex," Daniel called, expecting him to return with a stick or some small woodland prize. Instead, minutes later, the shepherd emerged with something far more shocking clutched gently in his jaws. Daniel froze. Nestled in Rex's mouth, unharmed but trembling, was a tiny lion cub. Its golden fur glistened in the morning light, its eyes wide with fear and innocence. Daniel's heart pounded as he crouched low, carefully lifting the trembling cub from Rex's mouth. The shepherd wagged his tail, proud of his discovery, as if he had brought home a lost puppy instead of a wild creature. Daniel cradled the cub in his arms, its tiny body warm but fragile, its faint whimpers tugging at something deep inside him. Before Daniel could fully process what had just happened, Rex's ears twitched again. With a sudden bark, he darted back into the trees, disappearing into the thick shadows of the forest. "Rex, no!" Daniel shouted, panic lacing his voice. His mind raced. What if the mother lion was nearby? What if Rex stumbled into danger? The forest seemed to hold its breath as Daniel waited, clutching the first cub tightly to his chest. Then, through the brush, Rex reappeared, this time carrying another cub just as carefully as before. Daniel's breath caught. 2 lion cubs. This wasn't random. Something terrible had happened deeper in the wilderness, and Rex had just uncovered the beginning of a heartbreaking mystery. Clutching the 2 fragile cubs against his chest, Daniel's mind spun with questions. Where was their mother? Why were they alone? The forest around him seemed to grow heavier, each rustle in the undergrowth stirring both dread and urgency. Then, faintly, he heard it, a cry. Not the soft whimper of the cubs in his arms, but a distant, echoing sound that carried through the trees. It was the kind of cry that came from lost. Rex's ears perked, his body tense, and without waiting for command, he bounded ahead. Daniel followed, carefully but quickly, the cubs squirming, as if they recognized the sound too. The path narrowed, branches clawing at his sleeves, until he stumbled into a small clearing. There, in the dirt, were fresh tracks, broad paw prints of a lioness, but alongside them, human boot marks pressed deep into the soil. Daniel's stomach dropped. Poachers. The cries that lingered in the distance weren't just of grief, but of danger. The mother lion hadn't abandoned her cubs, she had been taken from them. Daniel stood frozen in the clearing, his heart pounding as the truth settled over him. The tiny cubs whimpered softly in his arms, their golden coats smeared with dirt, their eyes wide and searching. Without their mother, they were defenseless, easy prey for the wild, or worse, the poachers who had already left their mark on the land. Rex circled protectively around him, growling at every sound from the trees. Logic screamed at Daniel to leave. These were lions, not house pets. Bringing them home meant risk, not only for himself but for Rex and the entire village. Yet as he looked down at their trembling forms, he couldn't shake the thought. If he left them here, death would come before morning. Their survival hinged on him, a man who had never imagined making such a choice. With a heavy sigh, Daniel made his decision. He gently placed the cubs into a cloth sack, cradling them as carefully as newborns. Just for tonight, he whispered to himself, though deep inside he knew nothing about this decision would be temporary. Back at home, Daniel laid the cubs on a blanket near the fireplace. They whimpered softly, curling against each other for warmth, their tiny bodies trembling with exhaustion. Rex hovered close, pacing back and forth before finally settling down beside them. He stretched his body protectively around the cubs, his nose nudging them gently whenever they stirred. To Daniel's amazement, his loyal shepherd had transformed into a guardian, treating the lion cubs as though they were his own pups. As the hours passed, Rex shared his food, pushing his bowl closer when the cubs sniffed at it hungrily. Daniel watched in awe as the cubs clumsily pawed at the food, licking at the scraps, their frail bodies slowly gaining strength. Every few minutes, Rex would glance at Daniel, as if asking permission, then return to nuzzling the little ones with quiet devotion. For Daniel, the scene was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. He knew the bond forming in his living room was fragile, temporary, destined to end in sorrow. But in that moment, surrounded by innocence and loyalty, he allowed himself to hope. By the next morning, word had spread through the village. Neighbors arrived in hushed groups, peering through Daniel's doorway to glimpse the extraordinary sight. A German shepherd curled around 2 lion cubs. Some smiled in wonder, but others frowned, whispering warnings. "They don't belong here," one man muttered. "You'll bring danger on all of us." Their words carried weight, and Daniel knew they were right. Later that day, officials visited, their tone far less forgiving. They reminded Daniel that lion cubs weren't pets. They would grow into predators, powerful and dangerous, no matter how gentle they seemed now. And beyond that, there was another risk: poachers. If they discovered the cubs were being sheltered in the village, they wouldn't hesitate to come, bringing violence with them. The threat loomed larger than Daniel had anticipated. That night, as the cubs nestled against Rex's side, Daniel sat with his head in his hands. His heart ached at the thought of losing them, but deep down, he understood. Keeping them meant certain tragedy. Saving them meant letting them go. The rescuers arrived at dawn, their truck rumbling softly as it pulled into Daniel's yard. The cubs stirred from their slumber, blinking up with innocent eyes, unaware of the moment that had come. Rex immediately stood guard, placing himself between the strangers and the tiny lions, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Daniel knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, though his own throat tightened with emotion. Carefully, the rescuers lifted the cubs into a crate lined with blankets. The cubs mewed softly, pressing their noses against the bars, their cries echoing through the morning air. Rex whined, pawing at the crate as if begging them to stay. His devotion was unbearable to watch. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as the truck door closed. The cubs' small faces disappeared from sight, their cries fading with every turn of the wheels. Rex sat in the dirt, ears drooping, his body heavy with loss. Daniel wrapped an arm around him, whispering, "We saved them, buddy, but sometimes saving means letting go." Sometimes, Rex would sit by the doorway, ears twitching at every distant sound, as if expecting his little charges to return. Daniel would kneel beside him, both of them silent, sharing the ache of absence. The house felt quieter, emptier, but it also carried the warmth of what they had done together. News from the rescuers brought comfort. The cubs were safe, thriving in a sanctuary far from poachers and danger. Daniel read the updates aloud, his voice steadying as Rex wagged his tail faintly, perhaps understanding in his own way. They had not lost the cubs. They had given them the only chance to survive. That truth softened the pain, though it never erased it. Standing by the forest's edge one evening, Daniel reflected on the strange twist of fate. "Love isn't about holding on," he murmured. "It's about knowing when to let go." Rex pressed against his leg, eyes glistening in the fading light. Together, they walked home, carrying a story that would never fade.